In a world that's increasingly competitive, children are taught to focus, find their passion early, and be the best they can be in their field. Young adults who don't quite know what they want to do are often seen as unmotivated and lacking direction. David Epstein argues the opposite, however. Epstein is a journalist and the author of The Sports Gene and Range: Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World, and says that it's better to have a wide range of interests rather than a singular focus.
I first got interested in this topic in sports when I was the science writer at Sports Illustrated and saw this massive trend of increasing early specialization in youth sports. And as the science writer, it's my job to come up with stories about these things. And so I said, well, I'll go look at what the science has to say about optimal development of athletes. And it turned out it didn't look anything like the things that we were doing. And in fact, it says that athletes who go on to become elite typically have a sampling period where they play a variety of sports. They gain a breadth of general skills. They learn about their interests. They learn about their abilities. And they delay specializing until later than their peers who get stuck at lower levels.
Epstein felt like he was onto something, so kept digging. Again and again, he saw the same trend where those who took the time to explore different routes and built a breadth of skills ultimately reached a higher level of success.
If you look at scientists, they have about the same number of hobbies as the general public. But then if you look at nationally recognized scientists, they're much more likely to be writers or musicians or woodworkers or mechanics or electronics tinkerers or glass blowers. And then if you look at Nobel laureates, they're about 22 times more likely still. And so as you kind of go up the levels of achievement in some ways, you see these broad range of interests that almost seem like diversions but end up informing one another.
But it can be harder to deviate from a path than stay on it. It's human nature to want to feel a sense of security and direction in life. However, Epstein says that having a broader and more positive view of change is important.
We all recognize that we've changed a lot in the past and then underestimate how much we will change in the future. And we do that at every time point in life. And the time of most rapid personality change is between about 18 and 28. And the world changes also in very unpredictable ways. And so I think this early matching, the earlier you try to fit someone into a work sort of lane, the more likely you match the wrong person with the wrong thing because their talents haven't developed yet, their personality hasn't developed yet, and they certainly don't know the world that they're going to work in.
The idea of generalism is not a new theory. Scientists and philosophers have been studying this behavior for a long time. In his book, Epstein points to people throughout history who've embraced this mindset. One is Spanish neuroscientist and Nobel Prize recipient Santiago Ramón y Cajal, who researched during the late 1800s.
Santiago Ramón y Cajal, the father of modern neuroscience, who said, "To him who sees them from afar, they look as if they are dissipating their energies when in fact they are strengthening and channeling them." And so when you look at these kind of especially creative achievers, what you see is this network of enterprise, these broad interests that may seem from the outside like being spread thin, but in fact leads to these unique advantages, and these pursuits tend to inform one another eventually.
Looking at his own path, Epstein views himself as a generalist, though he says he didn't initially set out to be one. He's always bounced around from one opportunity to the next, interested in whatever work feeds his curiosity.
In my past life, for example, I was training to be a scientist. I was living in a tent in the Arctic Circle when I decided to try to become a writer. And particularly, I wanted to write about sudden cardiac death in athletes for a popular audience because of a personal experience, I'd had with the death of a friend. And eventually, I zigzagged my way to Sports Illustrated, where my science background was this huge advantage, where it was totally ordinary. I would say, very average as a scientist. But as a sports writer, I was a brilliant scientist. And so it was sort of merging these domains that I realized would become my source of power, basically. And so I constantly tried to switch the things I was doing and take skills from one place and apply them elsewhere.
While Epstein's zigzag path worked for him, it can be difficult to go against the grain, especially in a social media-driven world where we're constantly comparing our success to others.
Specialization, of course, is a much easier message, but we're obsessed with precocity, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg, when he said young people are just smarter when he was 22, that became famous. But Recent research from MIT and the Census Bureau shows that the average age of a founder of a blockbuster startup on the day of founding is 46. I mean, we're obsessed with head starts, right? If I had to pick kind of a subtextual theme of the book, with the textual theme being like breadth and generalization, one of the other themes that runs through the book is this idea that was very counterintuitive to me, that things that look like a head start can actually hinder your long-term development.
Public perception sees those who rise quickly to the top as the ones who are really accomplished. While this can be true in certain environments, it's not feasible for the majority in the long term.
Early in the book, I talk about the difference between kind and wicked learning environments. And kind learning environments are types of work where specializing actually does work because you're facing a similar challenge over and over and over. But those are also the areas that are most easy to automate. Whereas wicked learning environments, sometimes information's hidden, human behavior is involved, and you have to interpret it. Next steps aren't always clear. And in those kinds of wicked environments, it's the people who have really broad training who excel. And those are the hardest areas to automate.
Political candidates in the 2020 race are already talking about how advancements in artificial intelligence will affect a wide number of industries, ranging from transportation to healthcare. Many of these jobs are specialized tasks where AI is able to excel. But in the human world, research shows that generalization is not only good for future job stability, but key to moving up in the chain.
When LinkedIn studied 500,000 members to find what's the best predictor of who goes on to become an executive, it was the number of different job functions across an industry that someone had worked in. So the research says one thing, but I think our intuition says another. But that's why we do research, because sometimes it contradicts our intuition. Really, what people who go on to find success do is they respond to the opportunities in front of them and zigzag, and they work. Instead of looking far ahead, they work from an interesting opportunity right now that will build skills. And they say, who am I right now? What are my interests? What are my abilities? What are the opportunities in front of me? Here's what I'm going to try. And then maybe next year I'll change because I'll have learned something about myself or about the world.
Now, hold on a second before you leave your day job to be a journalist and then try to squeeze into the 2020 election as a political candidate. Adapting to be a generalist is about letting go of the need to hyper-specialize and finding a balance of interests that work in harmony. A starting point can be as easy as taking up a new hobby or enrolling in a challenging class that's outside your comfort zone. It's okay to cast a wider net of interests and find your path later than others, because in the end, these varied skills will be of benefit.
Someone that I interviewed and sort of unusually became kind of a role model in the course of this book is a woman named Frances Hesselbein, who took the job that became her calling in her 50s.
Frances Hesselbein went on to become the CEO of the Girl Scouts at a time when it was falling apart at the seams, failing to drop traditional female stereotypes and respond to what young girls needed. Epstein says Hesselbein took over and was able to increase membership, rally 130,000 volunteers around a mission, and turn the Girl Scout cookie model into a $350 million a year business.
She won the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor in the country, became a teacher at the U.S. Military Academy, and now runs the Frances Hesselbein Leadership Institute, where she is in her office right now today at the mere age of 103 and a half.
Hesselbein's success and broad mindset are traits Epstein admires as he looks ahead to his next venture.
I realized that what had always worked for me was not doing the same thing over and over and taking my skills to a place that didn't have that exact same thing. That's what I've continued to do, and that seems to work for me. And I have no idea what I'm going to do next, but I'm going to keep doing that zigging and zagging and taking skills from one place to another place where they're less ordinary.
To find out more about David Epstein and his new book, Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World, visit our website at viewpointsonline.net. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Viewpoints Radio, and subscribe and listen to our show anytime, wherever you listen to podcasts. Our writer-producer for this segment is Amirah Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment. Paid non-attorney spokesperson paid for by the Sentinel Group. Attention military vets and current soldiers who served between 2002 to 2016. Have you or a loved one suffered hearing loss or tinnitus after serving or while serving in the U.S. Armed Forces? You may be entitled to compensation. 3M, the manufacturer of earplugs made for combat, recently paid the government $9.1 million to settle a False Claims Act case for knowingly selling these defective earplugs for over a decade. Specifically, the United States argued that the manufacturer knew their earplugs were too short for proper insertion into users' ears and that the earplugs could loosen and therefore didn't perform properly or reduce noise the way they should have. If you or a loved one suffered hearing loss or tinnitus after serving or while serving in the U.S. Armed Forces, you need to choose the right legal team that has the experience, support staff, and resources to seek the most compensation for your injuries. Call the Sentinel Group now for more information and a free case review. Call 800-655-6458. 800-655-6458. That's 800-655-6458.
If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, please call this toll-free number right now. 800-279-0419. That's 800-279-0419. By calling your addiction team, you're taking the first steps to recovery. Don't fight addiction alone. Their advisors are ready to take your call. Your future is still a bright place. The help you need could be one call away. 800-279-0419. That's 800-279-0419. This call is completely confidential, and if you have private insurance, there could be little to no cost to you. Even if you've already been to treatment, give us a call. There's no need to let addiction ruin your life. Take the first step now. Call your addiction team at 800-279-0419. That's 800-279-0419. Make the free call now. 800-279-0419. Your addiction team is a third-party advertiser for various treatment centers and placement networks. Individual results will vary. Visit youraddictionteam.com/terms for more information.
Thank you for listening to Viewpoints Radio, a production of Media Tracks Communications. If you enjoyed this broadcast, please support our show by subscribing, sharing it with a friend, and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can find more Viewpoints stories on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and viewpointsonline.net. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Viewpoints Radio. Coming up next week.
Once financially got cut from me, I was actually working 3 jobs. I was working about 72 hours a week.
Why it's important to understand the financial aid process. Then,
the idea of traditional masculinity is, to be honest, just a complete fabrication. The idea that men are supposed to be strong at all times is something that every man knows in his heart is not true.
How do you view masculinity?
These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.